Even today, the name Erwin Rommel remains one of the most instantly recognizable of the Second World War. History remembers him by a title bestowed not by his own country, but by his enemies, the Desert Fox. To the British soldiers who faced him in the sun-scorched sands of North Africa, Rommel embodied a paradox, a commander of the Axis powers who nonetheless fought with a swaggering boldness, tactical intuition, and personal bravery that earned him a level of respect rarely granted in war. His battlefield reputation became legend. His aura, carefully cultivated by Nazi propaganda, became myth. Yet behind the desert exploits, behind the photographs and heroic headlines, behind the celebrated image of Germany's armored genius, was a man engaged in a private battle far more dangerous than any fought with tanks and guns. This is the story of that Rommel, the soldier who told Adolf Hitler the truth no other general dared to speak. Understanding Erwin Rommel requires understanding the world that shaped him. Born in Württemberg in 1891, Rommel entered the military long before Hitler rose to power. In the First World War, he served with distinction, earning a reputation for fearlessness and tactical originality. Long after Germany's defeat in 1918, when the Treaty of Versailles shrank the German military to a shadow of its former self, Rommel chose to remain. He became an instructor, a thinker, and eventually a favorite rising star within the new Nazi regime. Though at the time, Rommel, like many Germans, did not yet see the full nature of the dictatorship he served. As Adolf Hitler consolidated power throughout the 1930s, Rommel's path crossed repeatedly with the future dictators. He served as an officer at Nazi rallies and later commanded Hitler's own military escort. Promotions followed: captain, major, colonel, each step lifting him deeper into the high command of a country accelerating toward another catastrophic war. When the invasion of Poland in September 1939 ignited World War II, Rommel was poised for the role that would define him. Hitler recognized in Rommel not only talent, but usefulness. In 1940, the Führer entrusted him with the 7th Panzer Division, a fast-moving armored force destined to spearhead Germany's blitzkrieg attack into France. Rommel's division carved a path of astonishing speed and audacity across France, earning him notoriety among friend and foe alike. But fame would find its fullest expression the following year in the deserts of Libya and Egypt. In early 1941, Rommel was dispatched to North Africa to command the newly formed Deutsches Afrikakorps. Conditions there, harsh climates, vast spaces, and unpredictable logistics, were better suited to improvisation and instinct than rigid planning. This was Rommel's natural environment. He led from the front, his command car often so close to the fighting that his own soldiers occasionally mistook it for that of an enemy scout. His flair for fast attacks and daring maneuvers repeatedly stunned the British, who grudgingly nicknamed him the Desert Fox. At home in Germany, Joseph Goebbels seized upon Rommel's charisma and victories. Soon his image filled newspapers and newsreels. He became the symbolic face of the Wehrmacht, a clean, honorable, heroic soldier in a war increasingly marked by brutality, genocide, and the ideological fanaticism of the Nazi state. Yet even as his fame peaked, Rommel's faith in Hitler began to crack. He saw logistical neglect, strategic delusion, and political interference undermine the campaigns in North Africa. Requests for reinforcements went unanswered. Critical supply shortages crippled his army. By 1943, Rommel sensed something darker still: the growing evidence of mass killings atrocities, and crimes committed in the East. To a man raised on traditional military honor, this was a revelation both shocking and morally corrosive. Still, he fought on. Still, he obeyed his oath. But by the time he was ordered to France in late 1943 to prepare for an Allied invasion, Rommel's loyalty was no longer unquestioning. The famed field marshal had come to a dangerous conclusion. Germany could not win the war. Hitler would not save the nation, and telling the truth might cost him everything. Erwin Rommel's rise to fame in the early years of World War II was built on a foundation of tactical brilliance, tireless energy, and a leadership style that set him apart from the conventional Prussian generals who populated the German High Command. He was a battlefield commander above all else, one who believed in leading from the front, in seeing the field with his own eyes, and in the power of speed and surprise to compensate for material disadvantage. These traits had served him well in France, but it was North Africa that transformed him from a gifted general into a legend. When Rommel arrived in Libya in February 1941, the Axis position in North Africa was precarious. Italy's military campaign had faltered, and British Commonwealth forces had swept across the desert, threatening to drive Italy completely out of the region. Rommel's assignment was intended only as a limited support mission, a small intervention to stabilize the Italian position. But Rommel never accepted limitations easily. The moment his boots hit the desert sand, he saw opportunity. The desert offered to Rommel the kind of battlefield he loved: vast, open, uncluttered, and unrestricted by heavy vegetation or urban landscapes. Tanks could maneuver freely, mobility mattered more than mass, and the commander with the boldest plan could seize the initiative. Rommel immediately took action. Against orders to remain defensive, he launched a series of rapid assaults that caught the British off guard. His Africa Corps smashed through enemy lines, retaking territory that had been lost and driving British forces toward the Egyptian frontier. His troops admired his fearlessness. He did not sit in a distant bunker or secure headquarters. He stood in the open, binoculars raised, often within range of enemy fire. Soldiers later recalled him climbing onto tank turrets in the midst of battle, calmly giving orders while bullets cracked overhead. It was behavior that both inspired his men and frustrated his superiors, who feared that the death of such a charismatic leader would devastate morale. The British grew to respect him as well, perhaps in some cases more than Hitler did. They studied his movements, tracked his maneuvers, and acknowledged his audacity with a nickname meant as both admiration and caution: the Desert Fox. Yet the British possessed a secret advantage that Rommel never fully believed possible. They were reading German encrypted communications through the Ultra Intelligence program. British codebreakers at Bletchley Park had cracked the Enigma cipher, allowing them to intercept operational plans and supply schedules. Nevertheless, Rommel frequently acted on instinct, ignoring orders sent from Berlin, rendering ultra-intelligence useless because he had already changed the plan. But boldness has limits. Despite tactical brilliance, the German effort in North Africa was starved of supplies. Hitler considered the theater secondary, preferring to focus resources on the Eastern Front. Rommel, who regularly pleaded for reinforcements, fuel, and ammunition, found his requests ignored or delayed. The British enjoyed uninterrupted supply lines across the Mediterranean and soon reinforced their position with American troops following the United States' entry into the war. By late 1942, the strategic tide turned. At El Alamein, Under the command of General Bernard Montgomery, British forces decisively defeated Rommel. The Afrika Korps began a long, painful retreat. Rommel, exhausted, sick, and disillusioned, realized that the campaign was doomed. His letters to his wife grew darker, filled with frustration at the impossible position his men faced. He felt abandoned, sent into battle with insufficient resources, and blamed for failures that were not his own. When North Africa finally fell in May 1943, Rommel returned to Germany. He witnessed firsthand the widening gap between Hitler's delusions and the reality of the war. Hitler remained convinced that Germany could still achieve victory. Rommel knew better. He also knew that speaking the truth was dangerous. Still, Rommel was not a man who hid behind caution. After a tense meeting with Hitler, in which he bluntly stated that North Africa had been lost because of lack of support, he left Berlin more doubtful than ever about the leader he had once admired. For Rommel, this was a painful transition. Hitler had promoted him, encouraged him, and praised him publicly. The two shared a veteran's bond from World War I. Rommel had admired Hitler as a restorer of German pride and stability, but now he began to see the consequences of blind obedience, catastrophic decisions, ruinous strategies, and the growing evidence of atrocities committed in the East. For many Germans, including senior officers, rumors of mass killings and concentration camps were only whispers. But as the war dragged on, those whispers grew louder. Rommel learned about the execution of Soviet POWs and civilians, the brutality of the SS units, and the systematic nature of the killings. For a man who held to a traditional military code, even if he served a criminal regime, these revelations were deeply unsettling. They forced Rommel to confront not only the futility of the war, but also the moral responsibility of continuing to support Hitler's leadership. In late 1943, Rommel received a new assignment. He was appointed Inspector General of the Atlantic Defenses and then given command of Army Group B, responsible for defending Western Europe against the coming Allied invasion. This was a monumental task. Hitler boasted of the Atlantic Wall, a vast network of bunkers, mines, gun emplacements, and obstacles stretching from Norway to France. But when Rommel toured the defenses, he uncovered a devastating truth. The wall was more illusion than reality. Many fortifications were incomplete. Some were mere wooden decoys. Others existed only on paper. Rommel, horrified, immediately set to work. He poured every ounce of his energy into strengthening the coastline. Under his supervision, beach obstacles multiplied, minefields expanded, and divisions were drilled relentlessly. Rommel believed that the invasion had to be halted on the beaches. If the Allies gained a foothold, their air superiority and logistical strength would doom Germany. Yet Rommel's strategy met resistance from other German commanders, particularly Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt. Rundstedt favored a mobile defense, holding armored divisions inland and counter-attacking once the Allies landed. But Rommel believed such a counterattack was impossible. Allied aircraft dominated the skies. Any movement of armor in daylight would be destroyed before reaching the front. Only a strong coastal defense could prevent disaster. As preparations continued into 1944, Rommel's private doubts about the war intensified. He confided in his staff that Germany could no longer achieve victory. The only hope was to negotiate with the Western Allies and end the fighting before the Soviet advance from the east consumed the country entirely. This was a radical view, one that bordered on treason in Hitler's eyes. Yet Rommel was driven not by ambition, but by fear. fear that Germany would be annihilated, fear that millions more would die unnecessarily. In early June 1944, Rommel traveled to Germany for two reasons: to visit his wife for her 50th birthday and to prepare for a meeting with Hitler. Rommel intended to confront Hitler again, to warn him that a major invasion was imminent, and to argue that the war must be ended diplomatically while it was still possible. But the timing could not have been worse. On June 6, 1944, D-Day, the Allied invasion began. Rommel was not at his headquarters when the largest amphibious invasion in history struck the Normandy coast. His absence was not negligence, but a cruel twist of fate. By the time he returned to France late that night, the beachhead was established. The Allies had already landed over 150,000 troops. The Atlantic Wall had failed. Rommel quickly realized the gravity of the situation. He urged immediate troop redeployment and demanded permission to withdraw to more defensible positions. But Hitler refused. He insisted that the beachhead be crushed with counterattacks that Rommel believed were impossible. The Führer, convinced that a second invasion would come at Calais due to Operation Fortitude's deception, refused to move critical divisions from the region. Rommel was furious. A decisive moment had arrived, and the dictator's delusion paralyzed the German response. By mid-June, Rommel's patience ran out. In a tense meeting with Hitler, he warned that the war in the West was lost unless immediate political and military decisions were made. He bluntly stated that no negotiations were possible as long as Hitler remained in power. Hitler's reaction was cold and resentful. The bond between the two men was shattered. In early July 1944, Rommel put his thoughts into writing. In a 3-page memorandum, he urged Hitler to seek peace with the Western Allies before Germany collapsed. He stopped short of supporting any plan to kill Hitler, but he now believed that the Führer should resign. Rommel was walking a tightrope, speaking candidly, dangerously, and increasingly alone. Meanwhile, elements of the German resistance were plotting to assassinate Hitler. Rommel was aware of their frustrations and their discussions, though he did not join the conspiracy. His sense of honor forbade assassination. He supported the idea of removing Hitler from power, but only through legal means. This distinction would later prove irrelevant to Hitler. On July 17, 1944, fate intervened once more. While returning from front-line inspections, Rommel's staff car was strafed by British aircraft. He suffered severe injuries, fractured skull, crushed cheekbone, and nearly fatal brain trauma. He was rushed back to Germany to recuperate. The attack removed him permanently from the battlefield, but it also removed him from any possibility of influencing events in Normandy or in Berlin. 3 days later, on July 20th, the bomb plot to assassinate Hitler failed. The Gestapo launched massive reprisals. Thousands were arrested and tortured. Many were executed after sham trials. During interrogation of conspirators, Rommel's name surfaced, not as a participant in the assassination attempt, but as someone sympathetic to the idea of removing Hitler from power. That was enough. Hitler decided Rommel must die. But Rommel was too popular, too celebrated, too useful as a symbol to be publicly executed. So Hitler offered him a choice. On October 14, 1944, 2 generals arrived at Rommel's home. They informed him that he had been charged with treason. He could face trial before the People's Court, which guaranteed a humiliating spectacle and certain death, and likely reprisals against his family. Or he could take poison, die quietly and spare his wife and son. Rommel understood immediately. He dressed, spoke briefly with his family, and walked out with the officers. A short distance from his home, he drank the cyanide. He was dead within minutes. Hitler announced that Rommel had died from injuries sustained in the air attack months earlier. He was given a state funeral, one last act of propaganda. But the truth survived. Rommel had paid with his life for telling Hitler what no other general dared to admit. The war was lost, and continuing, it would destroy Germany. In the final months of 1944, as Erwin Rommel's name was quietly erased from the Nazi leadership and his death disguised beneath a fabricated announcement, Germany spiraled toward collapse. The war he had tried desperately to end continued without restraint. The very consequences he had warned Hitler about, their destruction from the air, the unstoppable advance of the Soviets, and the steady tightening of the Allied noose, unfolded with tragic precision. Cities burned, armies broke, and a nation that had once celebrated Rommel as its hero now moved blindly toward ruin. But history has a way of restoring the truth even when those in power attempt to bury it. In the decades after the war, as documents surfaced, testimonies emerged, and Germany reckoned with its past, Rommel's final struggle was brought back into the light. The world learned that behind the myth of the Desert Fox lay a man who faced a moral crossroads, whether to serve a regime he no longer believed in, or to risk everything, his career, his safety, and ultimately his life, to speak the truth. Rommel was not a perfect figure. He was no saint, no flawless champion of justice. He had supported Hitler in the early years, believed in Germany's resurgence, and benefited from the dictator's favor. He was part of an army that served a brutal regime, and yet, unlike many of his contemporaries, he evolved. He questioned. He resisted the growing horrors he witnessed. And when Germany's fate hung in the balance, he was one of the few high-ranking officers willing to confront Hitler directly with the reality of the situation. That rare courage, moral as much as military, is what ensures Rommel's complex legacy endures. Today, historians debate the details of his involvement in the conspiracy against Hitler. Some view him as a reluctant resistor, others as a man who tried to steer Germany toward peace without resorting to assassination. But all agree on one essential truth. Rommel represented a path not taken, a possibility for Germany to change course before total collapse. His warnings went unheeded, and his attempt to advocate for reason within a regime driven by fanaticism cost him his life. His death was not that of a traitor, but of a man who had outgrown the system he once served. In a dictatorship built on fear and obedience, honesty was a threat, integrity was treason, and Erwin Rommel, Field Marshal of the German Army, war hero of the Nazi propaganda machine, had committed the unforgivable act of telling the truth. The world he left behind changed swiftly and violently. Within 6 months of his forced suicide, Hitler was dead, Berlin was in ruins, and Germany lay divided and occupied. Millions had perished. The war Rommel tried to end through negotiation continued until there was nothing left to save. His hope that Germany might survive with dignity and avoid catastrophic destruction was shattered. Yet the man himself did not disappear into the rubble. Rommel's name survived not because of the myths built around him, but because of the man he became at the most critical moment in his life. The Desert Fox of North Africa is remembered for his daring maneuvers, his instinctive battlefield genius, and the respect he earned from enemy and ally alike. But the Rommel of Normandy, the Rommel who confronted Hitler, the Rommel who saw the truth and dared to speak it, that is the Rommel whose story matters most. He reminds us that even in the darkest chapters of history, individuals can rise above circumstance. They can change their minds, question their beliefs, and choose honor over obedience. They can resist, even quietly, even imperfectly. And sometimes, as in Rommel's case, the price of that choice is everything. In the end, Rommel's life reflects the complexity of human character in times of great turmoil. He was a soldier shaped by war, a leader shaped by duty, and finally, a man shaped by conscience. He paid for that conscience with his life, but in doing so, he ensured that his legacy would not be one of blind loyalty, but of courage in the face of tyranny. This is the legacy of Erwin Rommel, not just the legend of the Desert Fox, but the story of a man who, when confronted with the truth, chose to stand on the right side of history, even when it cost him everything. Thank you for watching.